call the meeting to order. Jake, you have the roll.
I do, thank you, Mayor.
Okay. We have a couple of new members, so I'm gonna just have us go around the table and introduce ourselves. Jake, you want to start?
Sure. Jake Anderson, Park and Rec Director.
Doug Wood, City of Monona, Algiers.
Wes Mossman Black, I'm the Vice President of the Friends.
Tony Gomez-Phillips, I serve on the Parks and Rec Board for the City of Monona.
Andy Kitzler, I'm a resident and President of Friends of St. Monona.
Mary O'Connor, Mayor.
Marilyn Gorman, former Monona resident, now on East Side of Madison, living closer to San Damiano. Just here as a concerned citizen.
Nancy Moore, Alder, and also ex officio board member of the Friends.
I'm Jesse Starr, I'm the Associate Principal on Winterport. Dan Williams, Senior Landscape Architect. Dan Schmidt, Landscape Architect in the city.
Okay. Are there any appearances tonight? Did you want to make it, Mark, do you want to give him one of those sheets over there?
I didn't.
Yeah, that's okay, I should have asked you. If you just like to fill out one of those, and then you can come up and sit here if you like, since we haven't had this time. I guess while we wait, is there a motion to approve the minutes of the November 15th meeting?
I'll move.
Second.
Any corrections or additions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Sure, yeah, why don't you just come up here and... Thank you. If you just like to introduce, would you just like to introduce yourself and then go ahead and say what you like to say? It says you'd like to
Sure.
speak here.
Well,
If you
thanks for
look
the floor. Saw it was a 2-hour meeting. I thought it might be at the end.
Oh, you always do it at the beginning.
My name is Bill Arnold. I live at 1222 Birchhaven Circle. And I've lived there maybe 30 years, 25 anyway. Love Monona. Love what you're doing. This is, Monona has, talk about lakefront parks. And parks, we're blessed. And if you go a mile the other way, what do you see? Old Brick Park. Anyway, I had a couple of thoughts, random thoughts for this property, and one of the thoughts was a goal of more users, more people using it. It's a gateway to Monona. It's our signature, it's our door front. And it's gorgeous, but it's kind of small. It's not Old Brick. It's not Winnequa Park. It's not soccer, baseball, but it's other things. So wild and crazy, it's organic, it's going to change over time. So my thoughts were kind of, let's think about this. Let's step back, look big, think big. And what if a lot of people were using it who might not, let's say the Alice House was a bed and breakfast, not a bed and breakfast, an Airbnb operated by somebody else. It's your house. You can knock it down in 5 years, you can knock it down in 10 years, you can turn it into something else. But try an Airbnb where people could stay there. If you're having a wedding in town, you put your family in there. Again, I'm very supportive of historic preservation. But the Alice manufacturing family from Milwaukee, this was probably a recreational property for the family to get out of town where they weren't known. But they've endowed the community. I think Alice School did some of their farm, but I'm not entirely, it's not bound and wrapped into Monona. This wasn't the guy who platted Monona. This wasn't one of our city founder fathers. So the idea of adaptive reuse to an Airbnb where you're bringing in people. We have restaurants within walking distance of at least two. There's tons of antique stores on Monona Drive. The Dean, I mean, we just have, you know, a lot of things and people. And the other thought, okay, explore it, you know, kick it around, talk to the planners about any other city. And it might be, you know, a new deal, but an RFP for somebody else to operate. And, you know, you do it on a 5-year lease with a 5-year option or something. So they have, you know, they have some assurance they can stay, insurance that they'll, you know, maintain and insure. The other thought was the parcel, the side of the property, and I'm not good at the directions where that is, where all the backyards of the homes on Winnequa Road, where all those backyards, row, and I was looking for how the heck do we get cars in here, because ingress and egress is not going to be easy. It's challenging. It's challenging now, and it's going to be challenging unless you buy or condemn one of those and create another access, and that's not easy, and that's challenging. But along that side, where all those backyards are, plat, or not plat, but just designate that for RV parking, RV rentals, you know, kind of like where the sewage treatment plant, the county has, is it the Anderson Center out there?
Lucier Center?
The Lucier Center. One after another, that whole row of them. And I thought of it along Monona Drive would create a barrier. No, that'd be ugly, you'd see these damn things. But if you put them there, just think of how many different people might visit Monona and stay. They're typically going to be out-of-towners. But in this, if you did it, you might create some preference for residents or resident families in booking, or Dane County residents, kind of give some sort of a preference to the funders, you know. And the tribe. You know, I don't know if the tribes, I didn't hear anybody affiliated with the tribe. Is anybody anyway, they might, if you said, well, we're going to have RV camping for, you know, 10 spots or however long, I didn't have a chance to run a tape or get an idea of how long or how many, but even if it's just 10, one car per one parking space, and you get a lot of guests. And again, it doesn't have to be necessarily permanent. You can try it for 5 years and see. I'm just trying to bring people there, and they would be. You know, I tried to call Dane County to ask how their rentals at Lucier Center go, and I think it's extremely popular. I've camped on the Mississippi River, and some of the cities had campgrounds near the city. It's not unheard. Again, if you looked at users, you might get a lot of users for different segments.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, we will move on. We have no unfinished business. Under new business, item 6A, presentation and discussion of the focus group meetings. Did everyone see mid-afternoon, Jake sent out an email with notes from the most recent 2 meetings. I don't think we need to totally rehash them. Dan, if you just have a couple minutes to talk about this whole focus group process in general, if you want to give us a little update on
I'm going to
that.
let Dan Schmidt, Dan's been leading that effort
Okay.
with Emily, who you met at our last meeting. I'll let him fill you in on what's been occurring, and then if you have any questions on the notes that we've submitted so far, by all means ask, and then we'll fill you in
Okay.
in more detail.
Okay. So we've had 5 meetings over the last 2 weeks. Our first meeting was with the nonprofit or community partners classified group, which was the Blooming Grove Historical Society, Clean Lakes Alliance, Gigi's Playhouse, Aldo Leopold Nature Center, Lake Nona Sailing Club and Access to Independence were the reps who were available to attend that meeting. Had a good hour-long conversation with that group on background on their understanding of the site, ideas based on their organization's use for a park setting of how that could go, and the overall consensus from the group was generally that the character of the site should be maintained as much as possible, that it's rare to find such a large undisturbed property on the lakefront in any community, Madison or outside of that. And opportunities for interaction with the natural elements, and being able to bring different groups out to the site. Gigi's Playhouse and Aldo Leopold mentioned being able to bring small groups. Gigi's Playhouse has had an event out there in the fall and have taken some of their groups over, being right across the street. So they're definitely interested in the potential kind of partnerships and how they could utilize programming for the site. Aldo Leopold, the center themselves haven't been there. Their conservation director is a birder, so he frequents the park quite a bit and says the quality of the bird watching in San Damiano is pretty good. So he's familiar with the site, and so it's certainly directly related to their mission as they move forward. Access to Independence as an advocate for individuals with disabilities, certainly kind of pushed for considerations of accessibility beyond just the ADA compliance. So really looking at universal accessibility as you start to build up paths and trails, other networks of how individuals are going to get to the site and around the site. We worked with them on other master plans in the past as far as kind of a consultation on different ways that some of those features can be rolled into a master plan, as far as recommendations on how to outfit restrooms or different trail materials and things like that that they can provide input on. Our business group, the only individual who was able to attend the initial meeting was Helen Bradley from B-Cycle. She indicated that B-Cycle has looked at the site and is interested in utilizing it as a potential hub or station, and would look at, based on the kind of amenities and mix and size of the station that would be there, but as a Monona resident is also very interested in the project and how that can move forward. As well as looking kind of beyond maybe the site itself and how this kind of connects and creates and enhances the lake loop. Helen said she would try to provide us with a heat map that B-Cycle has that shows ridership just of their equipment past the site, so we could have some data to kind of back up some of the frequent observations that we've heard of cyclists and commuters using Monona Drive and the lake loop. We do plan and had contacted Slow Roll Cycles and trying to find a time to meet with Dan, the owner there, to get some feedback from him as well. So hopefully we'll have that in the next week or so. We had a conversation yesterday with the Ho-Chunk Nation. Kyla was in attendance for that meeting.
Members of the nation.
Members of the nation. And I think Dan and I felt an excellent conversation on the importance of, I think, storytelling for the nation, and how a site like San Damiano could help with that. We shared in the packet the archaeological study, the literature review, and the findings from that, indicating there aren't any known sites, but certainly based on the data and mapping previously, likely was some type of a burial mound either in or around the site, but is heavily disturbed. So using that, anything going forward, we'll need additional study as far as improvements, but looking at that mapping too, and the relationship to other mound groups that were classified within the area and have been disturbed. Bill Quackenbush and others in the group provided some good insight on the history and use of the site, being able to bring back some of the traditional methods of farming. They've introduced a new strain of corn, kind of going back to some of the traditional roots and things that are already on the site, in different ways that some of that history can be brought back to and told. And I think finding ways to allow the Ho-Chunk to tell those stories in their own words. One of the recommendations was to find members of the nation who have used the site over its history and conduct interviews with them and utilize that information, whether it's the actual recordings or those stories, to help tell the history of the site. Another piece that was brought up is our timeline that we have on our story map is vastly incorrect. And Bill pointed out that we're missing about 7,000 years of Ho-Chunk history. So we will be updating that this week, but I think that is important to understand that this site has been occupied and used and for much longer than the history of it being San Damiano or the Friars or the Frank Alice property. So I think that's an important piece to tell. Bill offered to share a plethora of recommendations he has for potential programming elements that could be utilized with the nation for education of their members, outreach to the community. The things like that, I think the takeaways, I do want to go through these specifically. I think the updated timeline is something we want to correct this week. The interviews of tribal members I mentioned. Finding ways just to tell the overall history of the indigenous history of the region through different ways and methods, and how that can be utilized in the site. There was discussion, I don't know if Kelly can speak to a little bit better about a rope exercise where it shows the timeline of Native American history, not too vastly different from the planet scale that's on the Madison bike path. So being able to utilize some kind of physical space through the trails to say this is the starting time of the known occupation, or changes through time, to help people visualize that would be one way that some of that could be brought through.
One thing we did talk about that's on item 6 there, that's something to consider for the group. Cultural landscape report, or traditional practices, and that's something that tribal historic preservation officers do a lot with master plans, and Brenda's very familiar with that, and Quinn Evans does that extensively. So for the master plan for the park, we can give a recommendation in a report of what that is, and then it's really another master plan in a sense, because it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time of the Ho-Chunk to put into that, and for a consultant, and it could be the Ho-Chunk, to develop that cultural master plan. That would coincide with this master plan, so that these things that we were talking about yesterday can be implemented in the future of the park. But we can definitely give the outlines of it and the basis of it in the master plan report for San Damiano that we're working on now.
Absolutely. I mean, some of the things that came out of that were discussions on management practices for the land, burning, and other things that could be part of the ongoing restoration and ecology of the site, and those types of elements. Also brought up and discussed was opportunities to work with the Ho-Chunk for access and use without kind of permits or fees, or a right of first refusal, if you will, if for certain events or certain times a year, allow the nation to come in and utilize the space for events without having to pay or kind of otherwise occupy that. The ideal world would be a handshake agreement with that, but a memorandum of understanding needs to be developed, understanding of that as well. And then it's come up here, as well as several of the other focus groups, is discussion on renaming the site itself, and the opportunity to find a better Ho-Chunk name for the property. So that were the key takeaways. We've shared those with the group yesterday, and if there's any modifications or changes that come back from the members who participated or the handful that weren't able to attend, we'll get those to Jake to distribute to the group.
Is there any follow-up detail on the process to go through for renaming? Any suggestions?
We didn't really get that far into detail on it yet, but certainly, and if that's,
The main thing was, like we talked about yesterday, was if it's the desire to be a Ho-Chunk name, then be a Ho-Chunk name and not something that's derived from it. And like Bill was saying yesterday, sometimes it's hard for people to say, and he even said some of the names are hard for him to say. And so we've worked on projects before. Good Earth at Blood Run, which we had in our proposal, is a good example. So Lance Foster, who's the TIPO for the Iowa tribe, came up with the name Hay, which is XE. And I'm probably not saying it correctly either, but what it means in a sense was good earth, but that's not exactly what it means. So then the state of South Dakota turned it into good earth, and people were like, well, that's not what it means. So what we were saying, or what Bill was saying yesterday in the group was, if it's going to be named something by the Ho-Chunk, then it needs to be named that. And we need to learn how to say it and pronounce it, which I think is pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I think we definitely need to consult the tribe about that. Something we can certainly discuss in the future, how we're going to go about that.
I think the process, as Wes just raised, obviously would be important too, just from my experience with the renaming of what used to be Squad A. You know, because the Bill had worked with the judicial council to come up with a name, and then he couldn't find his files, and so in the meantime I reached out to Janice, and we started, generating again more which is something that Kyla always is quick to point out. Bill represents the government, and the other folks that were gathering to talk about the name were members of the nation, not part of the government. And then Bill found his files, and so, and because of course the elders had spoken in the judicial council, that's where it ended up being named. That's where, but, I honestly didn't understand the difference between the two until it kind of got and I just think I know as a city we were just all real committed to making sure that whatever the name was, whatever the Ho-Chunk wanted it to be named, we weren't going to do like some city contest to rename the bay, So then we definitely need to be sure we know the process. Yeah. So then your last one was the BIPOC birding group, and I think we probably all read the summary of that.
and sent it also this afternoon, just before we left to come over here, we also had One City School.
Oh, okay.
And spoke with the vice principal there, and just got some feedback. I think they have interest of bringing some of their kind of K-4 groups over potentially, so something to consider as we start to look at what facilities or access would be for those.
And you can send us a notes from that.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
And then we have Mr. Mundo is still hoping to touch base with that, and I think I'm not sure if it's with you directly, Jesse. Emily in our office was going to reach out next week. So we have a number of groups we're still kind of working through, trying to connect with, and we'll continue to kind of filter that in, hopefully over the next week or two, to get some of those additional contacts.
Okay. Well, the next item is to talk about, we're planning on having the public input meeting in March, correct? And we would like 3 options, I think, concept plans to present there, is that correct?
Yep.
So I think
MSA would like some input from us as to what those should include. So, Jake, do you have any ideas on, or the Dan's, on how to approach this? Would it be best to come up with kind of 3 general different concepts and then talk about what's in each one, or?
I think maybe the first place to start, we keep talking about guardrails, and basically that are things that just can't be in the park for one reason or another. So maybe we want to start there so we can take things off the list. So we don't go down that path and say, well, here's this version that has all these wonderful things on it that we're not going to build. So if there's anything of the group that comes to mind that a path that we shouldn't take, that'll help us with the concepts.
And I think just by way of background, I think, our role is to really kind of filter the information that we've received, the input and the feedback, and kind of give a high-level guidance of, for example, one thing I would say is, it doesn't seem like there's active athletic fields should be on the
Right.
property,
Yeah.
based on the feedback. So I think, keeping it high level,
Yeah. Yep.
not saying I want a twisty slide or something of that sort,
That's-
specific, but obviously you can filter in your own thoughts too, but, I think that's one role that we play, is just to provide that, and then you guys take that and put it in however you want, your
Yeah.
3 concepts.
And that's, I think you're right on task. That's what the guardrails would be,
Yeah.
something on a higher level.
Well, as long as we're talking about athletic fields, I think you could throw in a traditional playground too, and not to have a traditional playground. That whatever playscape is there is more natural.
Yeah, that came up in the first focus group with the nonprofit organizations, is something different, but more respective of the site. Also came up, I think from One City Schools, is they have their type of play, it's kind of more like a Montessori type, where it's build and construct and utilize different kind of loose parts and things, so being able to be a bit more natural and I guess hopefully not as much screaming and yelling as you get on a traditional playground, but something that's kind of more introspective of the character has been brought up multiple times.
Yeah, but Leopold actually has more of a natural play area. I don't know if they brought that up. They have this preschool program there. I think another thing would be a commercial business. And I get that there's some gray areas there, depending on the kind of thing we could do in the park with, food carts or whatever, that kind of thing, but I don't think we're gonna have a commercial restaurant there or something like that, because of our agreement with the county with this funding they gave us. Well, if we wanna give back the money, then we can do it, I guess.
I would want to interpret the agreement that we have with the county is.
I mean, as you just pointed out, I think it's a little bit gray. Right.
If we did a concession that was consistent with
Right, that would be fine.
the history of it. Right, because there's plenty of parks that have concessions.
Right,
Right.
but that's kind of it has to be
Doesn't
something
the agreement say we have to
consistent with
just,
other parks.
if there's,
Yeah,
if we have a plan, we have to go get approval for it.
right,
So
right.
it,
What I'm saying is we're not gonna have Buck and Honeys there,
Yeah.
I mean,
So maybe like we could, on here, no private commercial facilities, so no.
it's more, yeah, it has to be more related to. Does anybody have any other ideas?
I think bicycle access is really important.
Mhm.
That's something I'd like to see.
I think building off that non-traditional access, so I think oftentimes people think car, parking lot, access, but thinking of pedestrians and bikes, and whatever else there might be. Boats, yeah.
Both is important.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, when I think about the guardrails, Danny just mentioned, I mean, the 4 guardrails that we always talk about them are environmental, cultural, social, and recreational, and I think that those guardrails still obviously very much hold true in terms of what we heard from other people. People wanting to, acknowledge the history, the ancestral history, environmental values, and again, natural, more so science, sport, recreation. What we refer to as,
Do we have any more guardrails of things that we don't want to see? I know we all have lots of ideas what we'd like to see.
Yeah.
And which
I
we're
would
gonna
say,
get
I don't
to.
wanna see a lot of parking.
Yeah,
And I don't think we need a lot of parking. I don't think we need to pay for, you know, I mean, I think we need more parking than we have now, but I don't think we need a lot of parking.
And that is definitely something that we can show variations of in the concepts, but to an extent. You know, and the guardrail might be more than 25 stalls or more than 50 stalls or something.
or if we, I mean, I agree we need more of this. But in an area where it's not like right in front of the house, a huge parking lot, you know what I mean? Discrete parking. Is there anything else we think we definitely don't want to have there?
Well, I would just, going back to your comment about commercial, I would say that, well, I think there's more flexibility than Wes has pointed out. I think, you know, if we get to that point, I think it's something that we can talk to with the county, but obviously I am not envisioning any park in the county that would, for instance, have a boutique hotel.
Right. And that's what I mean,
So
more by
something like
commercial.
that, I think is probably,
Yeah. For Jesse and Tony's edification, we got $2 million from the county. And our written agreement with them is that it's not that we can absolutely have no commercial, but it has to be commercial that's consistent with what is in other parks. And it's Dane County parks, it isn't just, but that doesn't mean parks owned by Dane County, it can mean any. Which is, I mean, Old Park is a beer garden, you know, so there's a fair amount of flexibility there. But right, we're not talking about a boutique hotel or condos or
right.
that kind of thing, so.
So that really, that really steers kind of the direction of the property itself. It really kind of, it really kind of sets it, you know, there's some parameters that are sort of on the use of that space, and then that brings into question what is used to fund whatever should be done at that place, you know, whatever kind of slide that seems to be what I'm reading, right?
Because it's a conservation grant, right, to conserve the property is the goal. So, yeah,
Has there been a decision if the house is staying or going? Or
that's
is that-
something we
Okay,
need
so
to.
that has not been, okay.
I'm thinking probably at least one of these concept plans will include the house. I think it has to. So, yeah,
That's a
that's
good
something.
guardrail for them then also, that we would like to see one, at least.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I would almost foresee one with the house, one with not the house, but a different facility, and then one maybe with no facility.
Yeah.
And see
Yeah.
what that looks like, you know,
Right.
and really kind of have extremes on both ends.
And even with keeping the house, there's been some discussions, other focus groups on ways that it could be potentially repurposed. Maybe not at Quinn Evans and their experience to help provide some context to that once we start in the concepts a little bit, but.
Would the purpose of the house be part of the concept, or would that be something that evolves, like the use of the house and what its role in the park would be? Is that part of the concept?
I think it needs to be.
Yeah.
I think
that will steer the
I think
rest
of our
the
core
plan.
pillars, or there's this driver of, you know, that's the mission of this park, is public purpose. With those drivers, then whatever a new facility does, whatever the existing building does, would have to support that. And I think that amenities too, you know, so it's not that there's no revenue generation or no activity, but it's supporting that mission, I think, is the key.
And as far as the plan's concerned, with a plan with the house, a plan with no house, and a plan with the shelter, The plan,
No,
will-
I don't think that's what Andy said.
or a
Sorry.
I mean, I think they're.
Facility.
Facility.
facility,
Okay.
yeah,
Or something.
facility.
Right, yeah.
So the plan with the house would show the house, but Quinn Evans will be able to also show concepts for that house. So that the concepts might be some retainage of the rooms with the way they are. Another concept might be the inside of it is a shell in a sense. And it's just protecting the outside of it. So there's concepts built within the concept, I guess is what I'm getting at. So that doesn't limit you on the concept with the house of, oh, well, the house is just as it is, the house. Well, no, the house can take on different forms in that concept.
Right, but to go back to Jesse's question, I guess I'm feeling like we want to be presenting the community with more than just box A, box B, no box. You know, we want to, you know, to go back to sort of traditional architectural terms, we want to have a sense of what we see as the building program for whatever facility, you know, or not, if not a facility, what, for, you know, how we see the park being utilized, how we see the facility being utilized. And the,
I mean, I think that will come up when we talk about, not the negative guardrails, what shouldn't be in it, but what do we see? I mean,
Right.
like I think classroom space needs to be in whatever facility we have.
right,
A kitchen, a catering kitchen.
right.
So I think that,
Right.
yeah, so I think we back into what space fits
Yeah.
best for what we want to do.
Yeah, right.
But it's nice to hear that you guys are thinking of providing those illustrations, because I do also think the public, me included, it's hard to think of what you can use the house for, or what does a new facility look like, because maybe you'll be wowed by that too, because it can do X, Y, Z. So it's nice that you're thinking of that, because I think we and the public need to see that and kind of be able to envision what the potential is.
And if you get to a point with the, say for instance, it's a new facility, a new structure. If you get to the point with that structure that you want the ho-chunk to be included in the architecture, the design of it, we talked about that yesterday. Then the master plan takes on a non-form form. So we don't want to design a building and place it there and then say, oh, well, it's going to be ho-chunk influenced, because what we draw on, it's not going to be at that time. So if we get that far along in the master plan and that's the direction that you want to go, then we'll figure out a way to convey that message on the plan and in physical forms, but noting that it will go on to be another step. Working with.
Right, because this is just the initial concept.
Yep, yeah.
And so we can match our concepts and
Yeah.
sort of, you know, take this from A and this from.
So it's more of the use, like Andy just said, it's more use-based, and if you have a kitchen, if you have restrooms, if you have blah, blah, blah in this structure. And that's what could be at the end of the master plan, based on what people are gravitating to.
Because there's some things
you're-
we know we have to have.
Yeah.
in restaurants. Yeah.
Then the next step would be, if you want to go the route of it being something that involves a whole chunk, then you move into that phase with the structure.
I mean, I think that's an important point, especially we make during the public presentation, is this is a concept plan. These are not architectural drawings. This is just to give you a highlight, a picture, inspiration. So, I mean, kind of to your point, this is not going to be what the building looks
Right.
like,
Yeah.
interior, exterior, whatever.
It's more showing what its function is than
Yeah.
what it's.
Mhm.
Kyla or Doug, do you have anything to add in terms of guardrails?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think we need we don't need lots. We just need, I think we've identified the big ones. I was just thinking in terms of the house, what we're, like, I think at this point, anything that we might think will, like, if we're gonna keep what it could become is really contingent and kind of conditional. We don't really, maybe we'll end up just mothballing it for 5 years and let somebody, and see what develops with new, different leaders, like 5, 10 years from now. So, I don't know that we need necessarily, so that would be, I guess, another sort of option, sub-option with the house is not, like, don't damage it, maintain it, and,
It's just not in the current program, but it could be in the future.
right.
Kyle, did you have anything?
My biggest thing was just the paving, is
Yeah.
making sure we're not paving our paradise essentially, is, you know? We just don't have a whole field of concrete or asphalt or what have you.
Okay, well, Dan, is that enough for, in terms of guardrails? So I guess now, do you want us to talk about, I know we have a few already, things people would like to see there. Does that make sense?
So I think we need,
Doug?
definitely need boat access, so obviously kayak or canoe, paddle access, and that I think would be pretty easy. It's almost already, it is kind of already there. And then, you know, what more we provide in terms of boating access, I really don't know. What I personally think, but that's, like, are we gonna allow, you know, public docking there? I'm sure people, if there's bathrooms there, are gonna wanna, if we provide that, they may want to come ashore and use it.
It might be good to study, because I know that it's so shallow along, it might be good just to understand what the parameters are for boat access, like what can we even do? Because I doubt, you know, a pier's gonna have to go pretty far out there to get a lot of boat docks, I would think. Or
I
it's
would
gonna have-
recommend one of the concept plans show some sort of a boat pier access. The motorized boating use of the area in front of the property is not going away. And it is very popular, and there are opportunities with that, and also the way the pier regulations are, you can go out, you know, a significant ways until you get to a certain depth of water. And there are certain areas of the property that are a little bit deeper and not as heavily utilized by kind of the shoring of the boat. So they tend to drift towards the north a little bit more. So somewhere more on the southern, you know, portion of it.
You know, we've also talked about the possibility of like the water taxis too, right, which would be more of a pontoon boat, you know, as much as necessary, not necessarily public access, but pontoon boat, which again doesn't draw a ton of water. And for that matter, as you know, if you have your boat there, you know, I don't know how much shallower it is than where the sailing club is.
The bluff is not that shallow, but when you get closer to the north, it's too shallow. It's like where the
Right.
club's at.
Right, but my point is that obviously the dock, if it's possible, with sailing club is because the boats that can be pulled out and not left tired. Rebecca, this is Rebecca. Tony Gomez Phillips and Jesse Starr. We've just been talking about, we've talked a little bit about guardrails and things we wouldn't necessarily want to see there, like active athletic fields, things like that. And now we're kind of talking more about things we would like to see in preparation for their coming up with 3 concept plans to present at the meeting in March. And we'll get a chance to go over what those plans are in our February meeting as well. So it's.
I would also say just a sensitivity to the shoreline, that their shoreline is well taken care of, and what needs to be done environmentally and engineering wise, that's done well at this point.
Has there been discussion of any sort of a beach development, like there's a shooter beach of some sort, and you know, more of a sandy space where people, children or people may be playing on a recreational sandy beach at the near end?
The survey kind of nixed that. I think it was one of the options, you know, it's really well, but.
Because it's being on that property, you know, kind of towards that north end, there is that natural slope opening out there, but it's really more, like a lot of trees, you know, that are down that if we were to rehabilitate the space properly, that it would almost lend itself to a bit of an open type of beach setting. So that in hand with already a lot of park boats and shallow waders of people walking up onto the property, they would probably be coming up through that space, that shallow northern end that would lend itself towards that type of, recreational space. So I'm gathering that there's a fine balance to that option and also with having regard to the shoreline, But it's one thing that the public is gonna do what the public is gonna do, right? So I think we have to be aware of that it might just be a de facto beach nonetheless, because it's a shallow, kids can wade out really far out, and then wade right up on that property. To give you a little bit of insight of my background, when I worked at Old Brick used to have access to the Garber feed mill. And if you haven't been to Garber feed mill since it's been redeveloped, I highly recommend that you go there. It's really quite awesome. But back in the day, we used to store all of our supplies and tools and pots in there, and it was really quite treacherous to enter that space because anything could have fallen at any time. So during my period time there, there was crumbling bricks and all of this discussion for developing it, and it just seemed a very far idea to rehabilitate this space, just starting from the ground up. The money needed to conduct a survey, when I was in knowledge or something. It was just created, it would scan everything, and it just seemed like such a far off plan to do that. But you look at it today, and you look at what it took to develop that space and create it to be what a nice facility it is now. And so that tells a story. There's a history of that building that now you enter it and you can see what it was and what it is through collaboration and resources, right? And that's kind of how I'm feeling from my first meeting here with you guys, is that there's a story to tell of this property, and there's a lot of reference being given to the history of the space, particularly to the Ho-Chunk, and then wanting to make sure that we write every process along the way. And I think that's a story that we want to tell. And I think one of the questions for us is, where does the house play into that? And where do we start the story, and where do we stop the story? Because the Frank Alice house has been there for a number of years, and so I think that's something that can play into where some of these concepts shake out. Because it seems like we want to tell a story about the place. We want to tell a story about the history of the property and show that it can be something through collaboration in this way. So that's kind of one of my ideas that I think will tell us what we want to see in this park. Ideas like a natural playground, right, where you're using natural logs that are stacked and trees may be inverted or something, and kids can climb up, and it's creating this natural place for them to be true with this very serene space that the public has already given us input towards. So those are just some observations that I'm getting about this park, and it seems to be guiding me in that direction in terms of really not making it more than it is, right? So that's about it.
I think, for me, and certainly not, scratch that, based on the data, because it's not really, I think keeping the garden.
Anyone else have ideas?
So one way that I was thinking of it is sort of a range of uses from sort of low intensity, where it would basically just be served by paths and some benches, accessible viewing areas, and that's kind of it. And up through more intense public uses of it, whether it's for festival type events or beer gardens, and if there were any facilities that we'd want to, or amenities to add to facilitate those more intense uses.
Sorry, I'm laughing because Rick is now in the room and on the
Oh.
screen. I was like, wow, how does that happen?
You can turn that off.
You have to log out, I think.
I think one thing we've talked about in the past is, I think one unique aspect is the seasonal, like, people can come and use this park in every season, and we've seen that happen already. We've had winter events, we've had summer events, and so whatever the facility is, in whatever form, it's supporting the usage of that place and promoting the history of that place throughout every season. And I think that that's showing up in probably all of these options will be great.
Very obvious to build off that, if it's just a shelter with bathrooms, the bathrooms need to be Four Seasons. Not that we're getting into the architectural engineering.
We'll say Four Season
That's the
restrooms.
lesson.
Yeah.
Kyla, do you have any other ideas? I have to echo the garden. Definitely a lot of green spaces. I'm thinking about, I know Bill had touched on yesterday in our meeting of bringing the youth there, like the canoe trip we had last year, and continuing that. And I'm thinking, I don't know if we need like a physical structure for the Ho-Chunk youth or Ho-Chunk people to have. I think it would be, I don't think it would be as, for us, it wouldn't be authentic, it wouldn't be comfortable, it would just be like another building that's plopped on the land that we've got to use somehow. But like if we had a, you know, for us, storytelling is in the winter, so if we were to do like a programming of storytelling, we would only do it in the winter, and we would set up our own Chakotay K that would be natural. You could take it down and put it back up, or toss it on the wood pile if you're gonna have a bonfire or whatever, you know. So it's something like ephemeral that, you know, a space for us, but we don't have to have a physical brick and mortar structure there.
Sort of like outdoor
Yeah.
classrooms
Yeah.
or open spaces
Yeah,
for
exactly.
gathering.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There is a German concept that I love where, for regarding playgrounds, where they have very free, open form playgrounds where you can go like shoeless, and that the whole idea is to like get as much information through your feet as you're going through the playground itself, or just, you know, not very specific yellow plastic slides and literal guardrails for you. Use something that's very, you know, they can get out and get out into the doors and get a little rough and take off their shoes or whatever. And then, of course, I think the other thing is, yes, maintaining the shoreline. That was making sure that we're not having so many boats there that something detrimental happens to the property. So much use there that you start to see some sort of wear and tear on it.
Rebecca, do you have any thoughts?
want to.
I know you're sort of.
What's happening?
Well, we're just thinking of things to include in a concept plan of what we could put there.
Not even,
Like
I haven't
paths
even-
or things like that.
I mean, I agree with the garden, I think the garden's really important. Obviously, the house, I think something could happen with that, with whatever we need to do on the property, because it is part of the story.
We're thinking maybe one, possibly like incorporating the house, one incorporating some other kind of structure instead of the house, and one with no structure except it would have to have restrooms of some sort.
I don't feel prepared to answer this.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, if you want to chime in, feel free.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I have a question. Maybe it's more so for Jake than anybody because he's parks. Is there a need, or do we need to show a maintenance area in the park? Or are you going to store all that off-site?
I would not like to lose the garage. If you are looking at having active community garden, where we're gonna have volunteer work days, stewardship days, events, we will need storage for equipment. I wouldn't assume we'd have a maintenance garage where we're storing trucks and mowers and things like that, although on the north end of the town, you know, we are hauling turf equipment there now. Short of if it's part of a different structure or that existing bones of that, you know, garage, that could probably meet the needs, that sort of a size.
So I'm adding integrated to the line, so storage, but integrated into the site.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't, honestly, given even the small number of events we do there now, I can't imagine not having storage on site. It's, and not to mention lawn equipment and everything. I mean, it's just, it's, yeah. I mean, it's critical. It would take us a ton more time and resources to stage anything. So I'm thinking about paths, trails, and where we want to go there, but it seems to me, for starters, I think obviously it needs to be very much inclusively accessible to, again, the sensitivity to the feedback that we receive, that it's not, hopefully it's not like concrete paths to do that, that it, again, is natural paths, it's more natural paths to still allow that accessibility. So I think some, having some paths, obviously. And I'm kind of a mixed mind about how many paths are through the woods. Or where, I mean, on one hand, it's a big piece of property, on the other hand, it's kind of a small piece of property. And so slicing the whole thing up with a whole bunch of trails doesn't, or paths doesn't really, I guess I'm leaning towards kind of more of a minimalist approach, which is to say we should have some, obviously, strong access to the property and for all, but I'm not thinking there would be a ton of trails in those, or like
Yeah, my thought would be it would more follow the lake shore and also connect into the sidewalk on Monona Drive, probably on both ends, bit of a loop.
Could there be a
yeah.
loop, sorry, Doug.
No, go ahead.
Could there be a sort of a loop that tells us a story? At Old Brick, if you go to the Thai Pavilion, the path that leads out to the Thai Pavilion is symbolic to Thai culture, and if you look at the brickwork, it actually resembles the Thai little saint, right? So that's all symbolic, right? Very metaphorical. Is there anything, from Ho-Chun's perspective, that where a path can be somewhat symbolic of that same story? Just hearing you, we should be feeling the soil beneath our feet barefoot, right? But we also have ADA accessibility concerns as well. So how can we maybe blend those two ideas together? Can this path be akin to that rope, story or something to some effect, or to somehow include that into that process? We just had this discussion last night in Parks about running paths in some of the areas, and I was, Jake and Doug were there, and I'm a big fan of the waterway that runs through the park and all the way from the north end to the south end. And one of my thoughts was to join that path along that water, and for many number of reasons. Just a curving path. You're not looking one way. Your vantage is always changing. You're looking left, north, south, east, west. And what that does is it gives you different vistas and different focal points, right? You guys as landscape architects know that, right? Where you come around a corner and all of a sudden your eyesight lands on something in the distance, and there's some symbolic or some symmetry there. So in that regard, path system in the, along the shoreline seemingly be something that would be discussed. If the house were to stay or whatever facility would be there, the path would have to include that. But can all these ideas be incorporated into some way to tell a story about the property, or to encourage some sort of metaphorical association to the history of the land?
And we talked about that yesterday, telling a story, whether it's inside the building or through paths. And I think it was Janice was talking about Highs Grove Road and was her
Monona Drive.
grandparents or something, but they used the trail before the road was built, and that was the traveling route to Milwaukee, to the lake shore. And then Bill talked about ricing, and they don't do ricing anymore here because the lakes were dammed and the water was, but that story could be told there, and then you've got the garden there. And so I think you're right on track of what we've been hearing from
Well, it
these
also can
groups.
pull people from Monona Drive into the park rather than just send people up Monona Drive. I think one thing I've been thinking is how does the lake loop, how does this engage the lake loop and how should it? And
Right.
should we be bringing people from Monona Drive through or?
Given how they go through my neighborhood, I mean, we could have hundreds of bikes an hour whipping through
Well,
there,
it's
you
also
know,
like-
which may not be, you know,
I don't think I'd like to see that.
no.
So another story that I think, from an environmental standpoint, another story that I think has been coming out pretty strong is the wildlife there. And in particular the birding, you know, I mean, it's a hot spot. That's where all the migrating birds might, you know, congregate. In addition to our regular birds and regular species, and so I just wonder if another possibility in terms of, I don't know if it goes on all the drawings or if it's just on some of the drawings, but you know, certainly there could be signage around, you know, species, you know, pointing, you know, for people to look and engage. I also thought if there was an appropriate place along the shoreline, to have some sort of a viewing platform, or, you know, with a scope or something, like on the corner, if it didn't get in the way of those other paths, or didn't get in the way of the dock, if we had a dock, you know, depending on the depths of the water. I mean, I just think, I mean, every time I'm there, just about every time I'm there, there's people out there, birders out on the edge of the water with their scopes. And so I just think that there's this, and it's not just birds, but certainly it's become known already for birding, and so it just seems like maybe that's a piece of the wildlife that could be highlighted there too, part of the storytelling.
Even in the winter with the coyotes and the hawks out on the lake and stuff, we put out on the ice, it's fun to watch. So
Yeah.
it would be neat to have, like you said, a scope, a viewing scope some more.
Right, right.
Question I have, so the house aside, when we talk about the gardens or a different facility, are part of the concept plans gonna reposition those potentially to be optimal locations? So if it is a new facility, maybe not on the same footprint somewhere else, or maybe the gardens are shifted, whatever. Because I'm also thinking like a maintenance facility, or like by the gardens, is there a hose connection, water connection there? So just making sure like there's the proper amenities next to whatever the use is. Not that it's too hard to haul them 100 yards or whatever over to the garden, but.
Do old
So-
school with buckets right
Yeah,
up to the lake.
yeah. But I'm just thinking, like, right now, he stores everything in the forest, and then he brings it out. So I didn't know if that's part of the concept
Oh, yeah,
too. is
and,
just to make sure.
botanical gardens like Old Brick are a good example of that, and when you plan those and work on them, we use the analogy of the heart and the body. So you look at Old Brick, the conservatory and the building, and the higher used parts of the garden, where they have the outdoor music and stuff, are close to the heart. That's the building. And then you get way out on the edges over by the Garber Feed Mill. Those are your fingers and toes, and those are low maintenance plants out there, because they don't want to have to haul all that stuff out there, and they don't have utility connections to it. So that's the way a master plan should be thought of, and especially for a site like this, that wherever a structure ends up, whether it's the house or a new structure, that's kind of the heart, and it should function for these fingers and appendages that stick out at a certain level.
And what made me kind of get to that question was, I mean, I think the concentration of people are the house and behind the house, right? And maybe along the lake into the forest area. So if there's a way to draw people to the rest of the property too, because I think it's also majestic elsewhere, And you could utilize, you know, a variety of the properties for different ideas that we've already had, but, I'm just thinking about how can we really showcase the whole property and not just kind of that 5 acres or 4 acres that are right there.
As you're studying the landscape too, it'd be interesting to see if there's an opportunity for a natural, I don't know if amphitheater is the right word, but something that can support performance or program or, you know, a natural type of slope seating, just because I think it'll be used, would be used.
Yesterday, Bill pointed out something that I wasn't aware of, and once he pointed it out, it was obvious. This thing here. There's a spring, or there used to be a spring. It's not a spring anymore, right?
It doesn't sound
What
like
it
it.
was. But it's, well, I can't really see it on this aerial, but when you look at Google Maps, it's down here just south of the north of the house, and you can see it. It's clear where it was. And so for the Ho Chunk, that's spiritually means something. Like yesterday, what Bill was saying was communities were often oriented near the springs, or mounds, burial mounds, or spiritual sites were close to springs. And that's something that in this whole storytelling, that might become a part of the park, that it is one of these spaces that could be kind of set aside as not being overly developed. And so that'll help us orient up here in a concept. But I just wanted to make everyone aware that he brought that up, and you can see it. So it did exist. And he was talking about maybe there's a way that more research could be done on it. Maybe there's a way that it might still be there in some form, and it could be reintroduced to the site. So
Kind of resurrected.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is that in alignment with the hole that was next to the house?
It's
Because remember that hole, oh, we have, still
Yeah.
there, right? There was this hole that had like a plastic
We filled it up.
tub in it or something, huh?
We filled it up because I think people thought it was just rotted root. I mean, they kind of looked down and
Right, and so
It's kind of on where the,
I had actually heard that that hole was there because that's where the spring was, and they
that's
kept
sort of where
filling it with,
where
like
the
Jack
monument
told
is.
me,
Hmm.
that they kept filling that hole.
And it
Like,
keeps.
and it kept,
And it kept
it kept disappearing, you know, like it kept
Well, then it'll probably
reappearing.
come back.
Because
Come
that's
back in
where
the spring, we'll see what's there.
That's where the spring was, you know, that's what he said.
Huh.
But I
And
don't, you know.
to me, you know, we talk about mounds and wanting to do the ground penetration and see if there's anything there. The spring's just as important, or more so in some cases.
Yeah.
Anybody have anything else to add in terms of concepts we'd like to, or things we'd like to appear in the concepts? Jesse, did you, I know you're new.
Yeah, just trying to, you know, from a viewpoint of a representative of the school, of the
Right.
opportunities that, for students, you know, right now, especially this time of year, those classrooms, the monotony of it, day in, day out, and so for teachers to have the opportunity to plan a day to learn in a different location. We had the opportunity to visit with a group of fourth graders this year. It was a wonderful time. Most of those students, it was the first time being in that area. But you show up with almost 90 kids and you start thinking about what you need. There was
Restrooms.
over there, long lines for that. Teaching is often sometimes herding sheep or cattle or whatever you want to call them. So spaces that, you know, like it's wide open spaces, but for those adults that are needing to supervise students, like sometimes you need dedicated spaces, whether it's indoor or outdoor. So opportunities that, and trying to think of all 4 seasons. I run our summer school program too, so, you know, could there be potential there? So, but, you know, just kind of considering that if a large group came, group of students, what that might look like. Because I'd love for a 3rd grade teacher to say, we're going to do our learning at the park today. But what do we need for that? We need the bathrooms, we need the space to eat lunch, we need, you know, that access.
Do you need a
for
bus? Yeah, I was
you
gonna
know,
say a bus, like
if
you
we're
could
going to
drop.
transport there. We did the walk. It was a great walk. Those 4th graders were complaining a lot. I was at the end of the line, encouraging heavily.
Little stragglers.
It was a little torture walking past the bake shop, and then we're not getting ice cream. But I mean, it was very eye-opening for a lot of students. But you know, there's a lot of potential, and to get us through the year and look at that. I guess I'll also share too, as a non-resident of Monona, when I first took the job, I mean, you search Google Maps of Monona, and the big thing that jumps out was the lake there. And so like driving my family up the first time after we were like interviewing and accepting the job, and it's like, oh, well, there's a lake right here in Monona, but it's kind of a maze to get to it. Like I drove around that day thinking about, how do we get to see the lake? Like I know from the picture it's there, so, you know, that possibility of that, you know, increasing that lake view of like showing up in like your lake community and like giving that opportunity for visitors, just like we were that day of like letting my 6-year-old son jump out of the car and here's the lake and we're in Monona and seeing that as well. So just something I was thinking about this thing.
Yeah. One thing that makes me think of, and maybe we don't have to go down the rabbit hole of like, so in the focus groups, there was a lot of like, oh, we would use it for maybe 30 people or 50 people, or, you know, we need, and you mentioned like 90 kids. I mean, do we have to kind of, I don't think we want a venue that's like 150, 200 person venue maybe now. But like, I don't think, you know, it seems like a 50-person venue would be the minimum that you'd want to have. And I think that would affect, you know, obviously parking or whatever, but also like the size of a new facility. So I didn't know if we need to go.
Well, it could be a guardrail, being that no facility will be bigger than X.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or smaller than X.
Or smaller than X.
So I just wanted to bring that up.
And it really does, parking plays into that a lot, because you have to have accessible parking, and then you want to have a certain amount of parking for other folks too.
Yeah, so what's our driver of setting that type of a
Size.
cap? Is it, I mean, it could be, you know, what's the classroom, what size classroom? Because the largest group we anticipate in the winter is coming from schools. That could be one way. Let me totally just throw something out there. It could be a totally different other way to think about that, but.
I guess it kind of depends
It goes back to
on,
the building program.
That's
We
right.
have to have more of a sense of what's gonna be in the building before we can say how big it needs to be. What we need, you know, how big it needs, right? Because
Well, we know we're gonna have people who are gonna wanna have weddings there. I mean, can we say absolutely no weddings? I don't think so. Yeah,
We
I mean,
could.
but we could limit it to small
Because-
weddings.
But I think that's part of our job, right, is to figure out
Right.
what is the program itself.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
Yeah, but are we doing winter weddings or are we doing summer weddings? 'Cause
Right,
if it's summer,
exactly.
then most of that can be outdoors.
True.
But I think it kind of gets into, now we're starting to get into operating
Right.
models, and part of that is, you know, what type of revenue generation is needed,
Right.
and we're kind of just spitballing.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I would just say, just from my experience with the Girl Scouts, we would go on a lot of these big weekends with like all the Girl Scouts of Monona, and we would do a lot of like stations, and I would imagine that school groups might do that too. You don't have all 90 kids
Absolutely.
all together. You have a couple different areas, you know, so that's something too, though, to think about, having some different types of areas available.
You know, it speaks to Wes's suggestion earlier where, you know, maybe there is a facility that is, you know, geared towards a classroom size or a smaller size, but then you can, you know, thoughtfully design a bit of an amphitheater space that's more outdoor based that can accommodate 100, 200 people or whatever it is, you know, so you can seasonally shift the usage of some of these spaces, you know.
I also think though, again, I think that how we use whatever facility we have, whether it's no facility, the current house, or a new facility, I think that's another whole discussion, like, that we need to have at some point, and I don't know that it's to do it, again, taking into account revenue generation and what we've heard from our focus groups in terms of how people use it, which is different from Jesse about how they would want to use it. You know, and the reality is our climate's not getting any easier to predict, shall we say, and so, you know, the whole idea of having some indoor space, I think makes sense to me, but nonetheless, let me not digress. I just think that's a different conversation.
Yeah, certainly more detail.
Well, and I think you've put the guardrail on the commercial development, so once you go down that path, then you have to have required parking. But if this is a city facility and it's a city building that has a catering kitchen in it, it's a park. And so if there's 150 people there for a wedding and there's only 20 parking stalls, they accept that fact. It's a city park and they're renting that facility. And you can still run concessions out of it. That's a vendor. And the city hires the vendor and the vendor's
Right,
working
but
for
we're
the
not
city.
saying, well, at least I'm not saying, that we're gonna do big weddings there.
Well, we're
Like I'm
just,
saying.
I mean, I think we
Right.
have to keep possibilities open.
I apologize for bringing it up. I just brought it up in the fact of like, that would impact the concept plan to me.
Right.
Because a facility that would do a wedding of 500 is gonna be much bigger
Right,
than if we're just
and
looking for a classroom of 50.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know it has to talk about the program that goes inside it, et cetera, but, you know, I would love it to be used for classrooms and, you know,
I don't know
if, but,
at this point get there, because the facility also be a function of what we can afford, right? There's gonna be a capital cost, and then there's gonna be, so all of this is gonna sort of get right-sized.
Mhm.
Let's say, out of our master planning, we answered the question, is the facility the current house or something else? Then there's a whole right-sizing process that needs to happen
Yeah. 'Cause
after that.
we could be talking other, I mean, it doesn't have to be weddings, it could be a high school graduation party, that's somebody's retirement. I mean, there's a lot of reasons people use our shelters, our facilities, just something to keep in mind. Anyone have any other ideas? Because I'd like to get out of here by 7 if we
I
can.
I just have one other thing that I wanted to, oh, sorry.
I just wanted to build off something that Jesse was talking about was, I think it's important that we retain the view sheds as much as we can, because that, I think, for everybody who goes there, it's a highlight, for nearly everybody, and I assume has been, you know, forever, right? And along with that, also having access to the water, which will obviously have the north end where it's low. I am curious about where the wall, where it goes, that sort of path that goes down in the front of the, you know, the wall.
The
and
steps.
The steps, and then it's actually, I mean, you can walk on it. It kind of goes down and then it bends around. I think there's some chairs there at the landing. And it kind of then peters out, but you can see it. So I don't know if that's something that could be, you know, more simply developed, you know, to make it safe for people to use to get down to the water, or at least
Voters
closer.
are using it right now, aren't they?
Yeah, he's talking about more the area behind the house, which would
Yeah,
be
behind
your.
Where the
kind of-
walls are.
Yeah,
There's some
that there's
paths, big country there.
the concept of access to the water from what we would consider the $5 million, you know, area of the park, which is that, you know,
Yeah.
100-yard segment behind the house overlooking the Capitol and higher, you know, topography there.
But you're right, I mean, I think being on the lake was one of the reasons that made this parcel so attractive to us in the first place, to conserve it.
So the
Nancy,
one,
do you have one more thing?
yeah, the one more thing was, that I don't think anybody's mentioned yet is, I think that we need to find a way to have access from the neighborhood. Like, I'd like plans to show access from, not just from the Yonge Drive, but from the neighborhood, from Winnebago.
Whose house are you gonna buy?
Yeah, I mean, that's
No,
it.
no, we've already, yeah.
I don't know the answer to this, but is that all private property?
Yeah.
Is there any public access off Winnebago?
I don't think so at the moment.
There's-
Is there,
there
Jake? You've
is-
kind of
Not,
explored
yeah,
that.
not
There's a street.
currently, there is a
There's
street.
but we have people's yards to go.
There was, yeah, so there would be, require easements, or, you know, negotiations, but I think that comment has come up, at least to me, from many residents walking from the Monona
Yeah.
end, coming up Winnebago Road, that somehow coming in off of Winnebago Road would be a lot safer for pet bike access.
And it would open up access to a lot more.
I think
I think that's opening a can of worms though, because I don't have access to Frostwood Park unless I go down Winnequa and walk around. Like, it's cut off. Where there used to be a city easement, but now it's private property.
Right.
So I think that trying to do something like that might open a can of
Well,
worms for the
if-
rest of the city.
Oh, how so? Because other people.
Because I would want access to Frostwood Park.
Well, but, I mean, it would only happen in our case if we were able, obviously, and the same thing would be true for Crossroads,
Yeah.
if the people that own property want to.
Right, that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think, I'm just saying, I think that that would be desirable if we could get there.
I agree.
Yeah, I think it would make a big difference if we could get there, and I don't think it's as much of a stretch as you might think. Okay, then let's go on to, and certainly after we see these plans in February, if you want to add more things, we can certainly do that. But I think we want to talk about the public input meeting. Jake, is there, do you have a date for that?
So right now, on your agenda item 6C, we're at least proposing this timeline of getting from where we're at tonight to a public hearing. March 21st would probably be about the latest that we'd be looking at it. Would be that week is before the MG spring break. That gets us from, if we are presenting 3 options after our February meeting, roughly 2 weeks, 1st through the 15th of March, that they're available for public viewing and consumption and feedback. And then that would put us at a February 21st meeting, which would be our 3rd Tuesday, to have MSA provide those 3 concept plans and any changes or additions. So I don't know if that timeline works with you guys that's a lot of information to try to pull together and do, and then potentially a short time frame of the 21st to the 1st, but I think it's probably doable. If we have any, like, concept A needs this, you know, I think we don't want to mess around with it a lot, I don't think, but still, if there's some things that we want to provide as much input and opinions and the ability to gather public feedback.
How soon would you want to post the public information meeting?
I mean, at least a month, but I think we're flexible. I have to see if we can reserve, if we're thinking that we would have a similar turnout and would want the high school, I need to make sure that that date or sometime during that week is available.
Because
That maybe, and I don't know if it'd be an issue or not, but that's right in the high point of the musical. I don't know if that'd be an issue, or it has been in the past anyway.
Because
They
if-
usually have their performance that week after spring break.
if there are several items that come up at the next meeting with the steering committee, can we postpone the public information meeting then till April? If there's enough changes that
Oh,
it's
that
going
would
to take
come
more
up with,
time.
you mean?
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. So gonna wait till the day after our meeting to post it?
To post it, yeah. Does that give you enough time?
How does that push back the rest of the timeline?
Yeah.
I'm trying to
That's
get,
2 months after, because originally it was
Yeah.
February was the information meeting.
Yeah, push it back another month.
2 months.
Or unless we can do it with spring break is.
spring break starts the 27th of March.
So
The last school day's that Friday.
mid-April maybe, if it has to be pushed, and not the end of April. I'm just basing that on if we can't get, if there's too many changes and we can't get them done
That we talk about at our February.
at our
meeting.
February meeting.
And what's the date of our February meeting?
21st.
Excuse me?
21st.
So I guess the question I have is, do we need to have the survey completed before our informational meeting? Or, because is that driving why we need that month before, between? I mean, we could set a date for the informational meeting and then send out the information later, but is the survey the reason why we're kind of giving that huge leeway? Because can't we just have the informational meeting and have the survey still open or something like that stuff?
That's part of it. But
Yeah.
Part of it is you want to get out in front of them too, in front of the public too, so that they have several weeks' notice, not a
Oh,
last
yeah,
minute
yeah,
notice.
for sure.
I think if we were presenting 3 options without people being able to see it previously, we may not get
Yeah.
relevant feedback that night, and so, you know, at least 2 weeks before the meeting, having that available would be ideal.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you could do it in a week if absolutely necessary, and if it's a goal of this committee to have another round of digital surveys of the concept plans to kind of hear what people's opinions on are those 3 separate plans, then that's just another tool for this committee to use to kind of whittle down to a final plan.
Oh, I definitely think we should do a survey. I mean, so our meeting in February would still give you enough time to post something by first week in March, right?
Probably, let's see, it was
To give
2
you the
weeks,
2 weeks
7,
before.
yeah, it would be.
By March 7th.
By March 7th, yeah.
So you'd have 2 weeks then. Anyways.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because, again, that factors into what occurs in this meeting, in the February 21st meeting, and how much changes there would be to the concepts. And can we get it done that 2-week period or week and a half period?
So I'm still struggling with how we lay 3 concepts out to the public without having a good sense of how we envision the park being used. Like, it just, like, as it relates to facilities. If you showed me one picture with the house, one picture with a new facility, and one picture with no facility, and there were, you know, and a bunch of paths and a dock, you know, what am I basing my, you know, I want A, B, or C on? Nothing, because I don't know what's gonna happen inside those. I don't know why I would choose facility B over facility A, or no facility.
I almost feel like, I keep coming back to the story, I would almost want to see a concept that is all, you know, a whole chunk story, and takes all of that input, and really, what that would mean then is maybe we get rid of the house, right? And then you really just highlight, you know, that property as that, and maybe a second concept that has that other story of the house being part of that property and just a shorter amount of history. Maybe a third concept that has a house torn down and a new facility built, you know, that can accommodate some weddings or something.
There's really we could create a vision and goals and have 3 different ways to do that. Or we could have 3 different visions for this park. Those are very different ways to go about this. And I think that's, I mean, you're suggesting let's have 3 very different ideas for what this could be.
Just to answer your question, you know, you're kind of leading them down that path, you know.
And then we pick what we like from each, and the community chooses and picks from what they like, and then that becomes the master plan, is my understanding of the
Yeah, and
process.
in the survey, we'll reiterate that numerous times in the survey, that you're not picking just one plan as a whole. You're looking at different elements of the plans, and what are the things that you like and don't like. That makes a comprehensive plan.
The other tool we have is the story map as well, so when we post to the survey, we can have the story map live to be able to walk through and provide the level of detail that we have kind of agreed upon that describes those elements to the maximum extent possible. You're never going to be able to get all the details out there, but so when people are looking at the plans, they can start to understand what some of those connections are, what some of the uses are.
What amount of narrative is going to come with this? I mean, are you going to summarize all the input to date and say, okay, we heard loud and clear that the future park has to do X, Y, and Z. Now, here are some there's other things that we heard, and here's some, you know, very different ways of going about that. Is that, I mean, I think part of this is like, how do you walk us through what we're.
Yeah, there's definitely narrative at the beginning of the survey. This is how we got to this point.
Okay.
And then here are these concepts. Look at the concepts as whole. So there's elements in the concepts you may or may not like. Let us know what you like and don't like, basically. And then as far as the house, and I think it's really the spaces that are the hardest is the usage of the house, the program. And we can leave it as, we don't necessarily have a program yet for the house. Don't think about the house being programmed, think about the physical structure as a park structure. Should there be a program developed for the house? Should there be a program developed for a new structure, new facility? Or should there be no structure or facility on the site, just have it be open space?
Based on this discussion, I think
Yeah.
the 21st is gonna be an interesting discussion, because we're gonna have a lot of feedback on what we see, I think.
Yeah.
And how, and turning that around seems risky to me, frankly, because we have to feel really good about getting up on that stage and telling the story of what we're presenting. That's-
Right, yeah.
Well, can we make a decision about it after we meet on the 21st? I mean, maybe we'll all think, oh, these are awesome, let's just
Right, it
put it
could
out
be.
there,
This
you
tells
know?
the story.
It could be
in
like,
itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Jake, maybe you could check with the high
Yeah.
school to see about a date in March and one in April. And
Sure.
then, once we get past that meeting, if that,
Yeah, I mean, it seems more important that we do it right than
Mhm.
whether it's in March or April.
Can I just say one more, I just have one more question as it relates to, as you start to draw up these concepts. And that is, there was some discussion about like where a facility or no facility might go. And I'm just gonna be honest, I'm uncomfortable, I mean, I understand there might be other places on the site that would be ideal for facility or not facility, you know, and where the house is, but I'm really struggling with the idea of digging a hole, putting a foundation and creating a facility, big facility somewhere else on the site, given the sensitivity of that. I just, so.
And that might be the responses we get from the public too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think we know the earth, where the house is, and to the northeast of the house, where the tennis court was, has been, more heavily disturbed, if you will, probably than the whole rest of the site, because of those two things. But beyond that, it's just really, like I said, it's just really hard for me to imagine. And I didn't know if that's something that you wanted to know before you start to draw up concepts and put a,
well, but
put a house
if
next to
you're
the
talking
garden or
about
something.
concepts for the house within concepts for the house,
Uh-huh.
couldn't you do the same thing with concepts for a separate building? I mean, maybe there's one over here, but maybe there's one where the house is, I don't know, is that an option to?
The location of the facility isn't as black and white as that, you have to think about the soil, you have to think about what's underneath the soil, whether or not it's buildable.
Sure.
I don't think it's as black and white as,
Okay.
do we put it in the same location or a new location?
And the other part of that too is the use spaces. And when you think about it, the house is pretty close to the bluff. And that's, in everybody's mind, that's the place, the $5 million view. Does it need to be more open space? Does that move a new building in a different place? There's other factors too, besides the technical part of it, that shifts a facility.
Yeah, I would agree. I just, I just felt like I needed to raise it because I don't think it's as easy as like put the house wherever we feel like we want it because of the sensitivities.
Yep, and I mean, we get that there's a lot of sensitivity to say, that's true. So we'll wait till the 21st to decide about the public meeting, depending on what the results of that discussion is. Everybody okay with that? Anything else we need to talk about in this new business section? Then moving on to reports and questions from the committee. Everybody got the archaeological
study.
I did not have time to read it.
Is that posted now?
Yeah, it's posted,
Oh, it's on the
right?
website?
Yeah.
It is, yep.
Yep. Yeah, so that was, we went back and forth quite a bit, and I made sure we got input from Bill as to potential mound areas and that kind of thing, and how that was worded, and, so, it is what it is. But it's kind of interesting to see how he figured out how the shoreline has kind of changed. And
Mhm.
so does anybody else have anything about that?
I mean, his basic conclusion was that the entire site has been extensively disturbed, right?
Can you kind of sum up what was in it, since I have no idea?
As far as, well, the surveyed mounds, this is not, it might not be all the mounds, as you know. As far as the surveyed mounds, they didn't come as far over to the site. They kind of ended at Obrick, back in there. Doesn't mean that they don't exist, but that's what the report's saying.
Okay, thank you.
There is a summary at the beginning of it.
Okay.
Then, Jake, did you find out about this microboard,
Oh, the
mirror board or whatever, if we can use that, or if
I
it's-
didn't get an answer from Bill on it.
Okay. We had some questions, because I had asked the Dans if they could do a demonstration of how to use the Miro board. I just used it recently in another meeting, and I thought it was really confusing if you'd never used one before. But Jake and I wonder if we can even use it for just the committee, or it'd have to be open to the public too. And then that just kind of opens up, I don't know how valuable it would be at that point in terms of us just, So I don't know, Jake, should we wait until next month then to see what Bill says? And
I think so. I think the concern is potentially, does that become a walking quorum, where there's discussion and engagement between committee members, on this board, or the interpretation from legal on that, I think is the concern that we have. And whether it's just something that we use during a meeting, or whether it's really more of a tool for you guys and your consultants that can be shared with the committee.
yeah, so I guess we'll wait on that. And then the project schedule. You have that up a minute ago.
Yeah, so I think we went over that. If we are, between the information tonight and the survey data, MSA will have the 3 different concept plans available for our next meeting in February on the 21st. I'll continue to take any focus group data that needs to be done from the various focus groups during that time as well. And then looking at either that March or April community presentation and survey.
So any questions?
Will the February meeting, can we Zoom in, will that be available on Zoom? Thank you.
And we'll have the concepts before that,
Okay.
right? That we can all look at, like in the packet, I assume.
And that will be available prior to the day of?
Yeah, the packet this time was out on, what, Friday or Saturday? Yeah.
I
So
just got mine today.
That wasn't
You just got the
that was
2
just a
updates.
couple of small focus group updates that they just did yesterday. So yeah, okay, well then, I guess, next thing on the agenda, Park and Rec and Friends of San Damiano updates. Jake, do you wanna, from the Park and Rec side?
Sure. We assisted installation or installed the timeline sign at the property that was put together by the Friends of and approved by the city, and so that is up. We co-hosted or had the Friends of do a winter solstice event on December 21st, and we had a bonfire and hot chocolate. I did relay this to a couple members of the public, but we are doing, I do multiple week building checks on the Frank Gallis house. It is being heated per kind of the recommendation of the structural engineer report. And we have had minor maintenance of some of the plumbing fixtures and things like that, but everything has been working, at least efficiently enough to keep the heat on and critters out, to date. So, we will be having, approximately 11 trees removed, probably during the month of February, that are designated hazard trees, both described in the tree inventory that was done by MSA, inspection by our contracted urban forester, and a local contracting company. So on the site, you'll see blue marks with X's on the trees. Those were already marked standing dead ash trees. These are ones that would be deemed in more of an issue with public safety. So there are standing dead that will leave along the shoreline for habitat, and then several maples within the property as well. So we will alert and post as necessary, but that would be happening, I would anticipate, by the end of February while the ground's still frozen.
And we adopted that plan last night at Park and Rec. That's the 11 trees.
Correct. That's it for me.
Andy, did you have?
Yeah, certainly want to express appreciation to Parks and Rec for installing that sign. It'll have QR codes and such, so as we have surveys, we can post it up. And really was looking at kind of having an informational piece for people that visit the property to kind of see what's going on. And I think it was tastefully done and installed, good location and such. So we did have the solstice event. We're looking at doing another snow stake event, so I know they're in conversations with Bill about dates. It looks like either end of February or beginning of March we'll do that. In addition, Muskie Lounge has a fun ice fishing idea to do a fundraiser on the property. So we're talking about doing that. We might have one fun-filled weekend filled with the snow stake, and then the next day this ice fishing competition thing idea that they have. So look out for more information. For new members, if you're not on the Friends of mailing list, we do newsletters and such, so you can kind of keep up to date with those types of events. We did commit to the city to up to $15,000 to cover maintenance of the property, so that includes heating and hopefully the mowing. Probably doesn't cover all of the trees that have to be taken down, but we really want to try to continue to move forward so that this piece of property is not on the payroll or the tax roll of the city. So this is one step in that direction, and we're happy to make that move. We had a good end of year fundraising. We had a match by a few donors, and we were able to fulfill that and surpass it. And we're now starting in consultation with Jake and Parks, working on business sponsors for the beer gardens, the community engagement events, and a variety of events that we have throughout the year. One of those events that I'll just put out there now, on September 9th, we're having a large-scale kind of fundraiser on the property that will hopefully bring people out on the property. Hopefully by then we kind of have some concept idea that we can kind of present to the group that are assembled. But we're really looking at that kind of being a nice bang, nice fall fundraising event. We'll obviously have, I shouldn't say obviously, we'll have a spring fundraising campaign again, similar to what we did this last year, and then we'll again have an end of year fundraising campaign around Thanksgiving and then end of year too. So those are kind of just real high level things that we're doing. Of course, we'll continue to work on different events and things like that and notify you, and hope that you guys attend.
When is this, September?
September 9th. It's a Saturday event. So we're formulating a committee, so if anybody's interested in being on the committee or plan the event, let me know, and I can connect you there. So it'll be for community members and anybody who wants to be interested. So, did I miss anything? All right.
Okay, anything else? Dan, Danes, do you have anything, or?
No.
Good. Okay, well, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.